Israel Update with Gadi Taub and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Israel Update. It's September 12th and 342 days to the war. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and we're unable to establish contact with Mike Duran. I mean, I talked to him on the phone, but he has technical difficulties in setting up the computer and the microphone in the hotel where he is. And so we'll dedicate this episode, which will probably be a little shorter, to a tale of two scandals in Israel, which the foreign press hardly covers, but which Israel was preoccupied with, even though the war is still raging. One of the scandals is the episode of the Hamas document leaked to the German newspaper, the Bild. And the other was the surfacing of recordings of former Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit, who was at the center also of the Netanyahu investigations and trials, since as Attorney General he authorized the investigations and then decided to indict Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So let's attend to the first and less complicated, and that's the story of the newspaper, the document leaked to the newspaper, the Bild. The document is a Hamas strategy document in which it says many things, among them that Hamas should keep blaming Israel for sabotaging the hostage deal. There seems to be no indication that Hamas is interested in the deal, but the idea is to maneuver in such a way as to always put the onus on Israel. And the other instruction was to continue to apply psychological pressure to the families of the hostages so as to create a public pressure on the government of the enemy, which is us. There are two additional layers to this story. One is that what the Bild has been saying is exactly what the press and the demonstrators have been doing here. They've been blaming Netanyahu for the death of the hostages, and not just for the lack of a deal, but also to the actual death of the hostages, and of course the psychological pressure on the families is increased by the footage that they release of the hostages and by the fact that the demonstrators keep the issue burning and in fact intensify the emotions around it the whole time. So people started thinking about the demonstrators and also the press as the useful idiots of Sinwar. They seem to be acting by Sinwar's playbook. And so that, I think on our last episode, created a watershed in the public perception of the campaign that demands an end to the war or complete capitulation to Hamas in return for the hostages. Obviously, Yahya Sinwar is interested in leveraging the hostages to a capitulation of Israel. But the second interesting layer was that this document is from about 5 months ago or so, and the IDF apparently concealed it from the government. The government only heard of this document from the Bild, and so another storm erupted on around the issue that the brass of the IDF are concealing information from their superiors. Remember that on the night between October 6th and 7th, there were multiple signs that something is imminent. The brass of the top security apparatuses, including the Shabak, the Shin Bet, the General Security Service, and the IDF, the chiefs decided that there is not much that needs to be done, and they can reconvene in the morning. And alarmingly, they did not alert the government. They did not wake up the Minister of Security, known to you as the Minister of Defense, Gallant, and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister first heard that something was afoot at 6:29 in the morning, as the protocol, not the protocol, as the formal information sheets of the Prime Minister's office show. There's a diary there documenting such important information. But why would the IDF conceal this from the government? So one explanation can be that if they want Israel to yield to Hamas pressure, and there are many in the IDF and the brass of the IDF, as we know, that are on the dovish side. So if they want to yield to Hamas pressure and accept more of the Hamas terms, then of course they don't want to look like they are playing by the Hamas playbook. That could be one explanation, or at least that explanation was raised by many on Israeli Twitter and also outside the mainstream media. So the question is, who leaked the document then? It was certainly not the IDF brass who have been concealing it from the government. Well, the IDF was furious about the leak, but also began to do damage control, and they started saying the document is not so important, there's nothing new in it, we knew these were the tactics, there are many other such documents. It was initially said it was from Sinwar's own laptop, and then they said no, it was apparently written by somewhere lower in the Hamas hierarchy, and so they attempted to minimize the importance of the document in order to explain why they didn't show it to their civilian superiors. But that didn't work that well. So they sent all their usual agents in the press. A lot of the journalists who cover the IDF have working relationship with their sources. And what happens often, although in this case apparently more deeply, what happens is that the result is that the journalists become the defenders of their sources. So people like Ronen Bergman immediately started spinning the story around so as to minimize the importance of the fact that the IDF has concealed important information from the civilian authorities it is supposed to serve. The spins did not go so well, at least with the right-wing side of the Israeli population. And there were two additional developments which made the story seem less convincing. I mean, the spin sound less convincing. One was that Daniel Hagari, IDF spokesperson, and another unnamed person from the Israeli hostage negotiations team paid a visit to the families of the hostages, and that other personality, it was leaked, told the families that the only way to get the hostages back is to stop the war, and he advised them to help prepare public opinion for that eventuality. So basically, there's a guy from the team that's supposed to conduct the negotiations. He wants Israel to capitulate to many more of the Hamas demands, and he goes to the families of the hostages and basically encourages them to demonstrate against the government that he is serving in order to create pressure on it. And things became hilarious when Yaron Avraham, apparently they're so used to it that they're becoming touchingly honest. Yaron Avraham, chief correspondent, very central correspondent for Channel 12, said that the IDF authorities are attempting to convince the government that such and such should be done. And they're not even noticing that it is not the job of the IDF brass to influence government policy. It is their job to implement government policy, but we know, and I've said this many times on this podcast, that they are conducting a policy of their own. It is a shame that Mike is not here today, because Mike would have probably countered my harsh remarks with some balancing remarks of his own, but we'll have to wait and ask him. And the second development, which to me was even more frustrating, was that Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, went personally to the tunnel in which the hostages were murdered and filmed a video there. And that also created a storm, because if the Hamas interest is that we inflame the pain around the hostages, then going to that tunnel and putting out that information, which is not important information in terms of utility, it is I don't want to say it's not gossip, but it's sensational journalism. And the IDF spokespersons should not be engaged in this. Everyone feels for the hostages, and it's terrible, and everyone wants to know. But a society bent on protecting itself should bite its own lip and not let that kind of emotional catharsis out in public, because this clearly serves exactly the role that Yahya Sinwar wanted it to serve. This is doing his bidding. This is his playbook on why on earth should the IDF spokesperson take part in something like that. And then it was also all over the press. And the press, as I've said here many times, is in a campaign to support the hostage deal, and ultimately, in my view, in a campaign to end this war without victory in order to return us to the two-state solution. So there's a political agenda. And when the cover of Yediot Achronot, the full cover, no room for any other story, is a picture of that tunnel and the small thumbnails of the faces of the hostages, then this is not what a society with a healthy survival instinct does. And clearly this sends a message to Sinwar that murdering hostages, it works for him. It just works. And so they are basically incentivizing Sinwar to murder more hostages while pretending that they are bleeding hearts. Or not pretending, maybe their hearts also bleed, but letting their hearts bleed in public at the price of incentivizing Sinwar to commit further horrors. I think this is inexcusable. I think that the majority of Israelis think so too, and I think it's not just unforgivable, I think they will not be forgiven. I said on Channel 14 yesterday that I showed the front page of Yediot Achronot, and I said, if Sinwar himself was editing the paper, this is what he would put on the front page. And it's not that they are useful idiots. They're not idiots. Useful idiots do things unintentionally. These people do it intentionally. And their intention is to bring about a ceasefire. And so there is also a convergence of interests. So I'm not saying the press is killing hostages, but after hostages are killed, the press is using it in the way Sinwar intended them to use it, because they share the goal of capitulating to Hamas. This is outrageous. This is borderline illegal, or should be, or at least it should receive public opprobrium, and which probably does. Only we don't hear it because the public has very little say in the mainstream media. So one question people are asking on the right is, where is the Prime Minister, and why doesn't he send Mr. Hagari home, and why doesn't he send Mr. Gallant home, who is also undermining his policy? And my answer to that is that is a very, very good question. So we now move to the second scandal. And the second scandal requires a small lecture, if you'll forgive me. I hope it would be worthwhile because a lot of very sensitive strands are intersecting around this story, which begins as what seems like an embarrassment to a former Attorney General who's no longer serving. And so why is that even so important? Well, it drew a lot of public attention. And what am I talking about? Last week, journalist Amit Segal, Mike's favorite journalist, I'm sorry he's not here. I hope Mike will be watching this episode. I'll recommend it to him in any case, just to show how good an episode can be without him, right? You remember that that's the possibility. Although I myself am not enjoying it as much. And so Amit Segal exposed a recording of former Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit lobbying illegally with the members of the committee which was supposed to appoint him as Attorney General. And since this is the man who indicted Netanyahu, the revelations made a huge splash, even amidst the storm of news that we have daily from the war. So what's the story here? Israel was, as you know, convulsed by the battle over legal reform, which sought to curtail the power of the Supreme Court. As you know, the Supreme Court in Israel holds vast powers, unlike any Supreme Court in any democracy. The Supreme Court can strike down any action by any other branch of the government, including the rewriting of our constitutional laws. So the Supreme Court basically is Israel's uber government. So there was an attempt at a legal reform to limit the power of the Supreme Court. I won't get into the argumentation around the reform. I'll only say that beyond the argumentation, there was a feeling among those who objected to the reform that it's good that the Supreme Court has all that power because judges are above the fray, while politicians, according to this view, tend to be corrupt because of the day-to-day bargaining of political life. The judges are isolated from all these pressures and so can be trusted to make better decisions. There's also an ethnic and class distinction here. The judges are from the Ashkenazi elite and they look right and speak right and have the right accent, and they are the right people in the eyes of those who objected to the reform. There was certainly an ethnic element to that, but that's not our topic. What the scandal revealed is that the judges are not above the give and take of politics, and in fact we're in on this, well, corrupt bargain may be an exaggeration. Well, it's not. No, it's a corrupt bargain because it's illegal. So what Amit Segal exposed showed that the judges, the lawyers guild, the state attorney were all neck deep in this bargain that ended up with the appointment of Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit, and here is the secret ingredient, who it was guaranteed will be friendly to themselves. And what why did they think he would be a supplicant? Because the whole lobbying was done around the allegation that the other container, who was favored by Netanyahu, would not be a supplicant, and in fact is known to have been critical of the overreach of the Supreme Court and the whole system of law enforcement and the legal counsel to the government. We call it the junta, the legal junta, which is basically our uber government. And this is what the recordings showed. They show Mandelblit making phone calls or discussing with Efi Naveh. We won't get it. Efi Naveh was the head of the Lawyers Guild, discussing the machinations of how to convince everyone on the committee that it's dangerous to let this other guy, whose name is, by the way, Guy Rutkov, it would be dangerous it would be inadvisable for the Supreme Court judges to accept his nomination. And now the plot thickens, because over Mandelblit heads there was a cloud of old suspicions that he took part in an older scandal from the end of the first decades, or the beginning of the second decade of the 2000s, and he was eventually cleared from that scandal by the person who was then Attorney General. Mandelblit was the Attorney General of the IDF. The Attorney General of the state, Mr. Weinstein, cleared him and said he was kosher and closed the case against him. But you can't occupy such an august office if you are tainted with some criminal investigation. So it's very important how the case was closed. Weinstein closed the case, but he refused to say that he is closing it on account of a non-guilt reason. There, you can close a case on non-guilt or on lack of evidence. Now, if it's only on lack of evidence, then it's a problem for someone who is going to be the head of the prosecution in Israel. So Mandelblit was left hanging with this dubious closing of the case without a reason, without a non-guilt reason specifically mentioned. So the case. So after he was cleared by the committee, there was an appeal to the Supreme Court that someone with a case that was closed on grounds that are not specifically non-guilt can't serve as the Attorney General. The appeal to the Supreme Court was to strike down this appointment, and the Supreme Court was also in on the deal, apparently, because it cleared Mandelblit. That much we know. So this is just the introduction, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't get more complicated, but it gets more sinister here, because now enters another character to our story, and this character is considered by many as even shadier than all the rest of them. Call him Slim Shady, or he's Slim, yeah, or maybe better call him by his name, Shai Nitzan, the controversial, aggressive Attorney General who indicted Benjamin Netanyahu. Shai Nitzan drove the investigations against Netanyahu and wanted Netanyahu indicted. And why is this important? Because Mandelblit wanted to be cleared from the old suspicions, right? And so who can clear him from the suspicions of the closing of his case on the wrong reason? Well, the Attorney General could clear him. But now Mandelblit is the Attorney General, and obviously he can't clear himself. So the decision had to be delegated to the second in command, who is Shai Nitzan, who is the subordinate of the Attorney General. And Shai Nitzan now held the fate of his superior in his hands, while his superior was supposed to make a decision whether to move forward with the indictments of Netanyahu. And so Shai Nitzan held the key to clearing Mandelblit, and he refused to do it. There is no decision by the Attorney General, by the State Attorney, Shai Nitzan, one way or the other. And this goes back to another recording from, 2 years ago, maybe more, that we heard. Also, it was exposed from Amit Segal, another recording of Mandelblit, where he complains that Shai Nitzan, he describes him with an expletive, is holding him by the throat by leaving the decision pending. And so you understand why this is crucial, because it was up to the Attorney General to decide if Netanyahu would not be indicted. And he decided that Netanyahu would be indicted as Shai Nitzan wanted him to, but he made the decision while his supposed subordinate who pushed for the indictments was, according to him, holding him by the throat. Now that case against Netanyahu is falling apart in court, and it seems like now, in retrospect, like the whole system has conspired against Netanyahu. Furthermore, it now seems like the whole legal apparatus, law enforcement, the Lawyers Guild, the State Attorney, the Attorney General, the Judiciary, the Supreme Court, all considered by the public left-leaning, were determined to secure an Attorney General who would serve the overarching cause of, allegedly, there's no proof of that, of removing Netanyahu and doing for the left what it could not do in the ballot box. And if this reminds you of some Elvin Bragg or something else, then, well, maybe you are not entirely in error. Because when all is said and done, the right is the only real danger to the limitless power of the judiciary, to judicial supremacy in Israel. And as you may have remembered, if you recall what happened before the war, what was on everybody's mind was a judicial reform advanced by the Netanyahu coalition. And it was then said that Netanyahu is doing it in order to save himself from the trial, which was patently not true, because the trial was already in progress and nothing could stop it. And secondly, Netanyahu now has a vested interest in the trial continuing, because it is now demonstrated daily in court that the indictments submitted by Shai Nitzan and approved by Attorney General Mandelblit were actually very, very flimsy, and many people are saying that the Prime Minister was framed. And so it is everybody's interest now to find in court whether or not the Prime Minister of Israel was framed by a politically motivated investigation. Well, that's it from me, for today. Mike will be here. He will be here next week, and I hope we can record on a Tuesday as we usually do. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you in, I guess it's less than a week.